Now we want to remove all the meat from the tail feather. We want to start by removing what's left of the tail bone. You don't want to cut through the feather quills, you just want to remove the tail bone. That's going to be right in the center of the tail. We're also going to cut off some of this excess meat. Now that we've removed the tailbone, we want to put some borax on the tail and use the wheel to remove the rest of the meat and fatty tissue from around the feather quills. I'm just going to run these feather quills right along the wheel. As you can see, they're starting to become exposed as all that flesh gets removed. You don't want to separate the feather quills as far as having these feathers start to fall out. You just want to remove as much of the meat as possible. You also want to get underneath this second row of feathers. We'll come through with our scissors and remove a little bit more of this tailbone. A little bit of this excess meat from the sides. Hit it, put a little bit more borax on it, and hit it one more time on the wheel. Now all of the meat and flesh has been removed from the tail. We'll now start the washing process. Now that we've completed the fleshing process of the tail, we want to go ahead and wash the tail to remove all the fat, tissue, meat, and grease that could be on the feather quills and on the feathers themselves. So to start, we want to put a small amount of soap right on the feather quills. Rub this into these quills, help displace some of that grease. I already pre-mixed up a batch of lukewarm soapy water. I'm going to submerge the tail and work these quills with my fingers in this water just to start to wash them. Along with the rest of the tail, start soaking that up, removing all the dried blood that might be on it. You can also use a wire brush if you want to help remove any excess tissue that might be on the feather quills. If some of the feather quills fall off during this process, some of the feathers come disconnected, don't worry about it. When we start putting the tail back together, we can glue those right back in place. Now that we've washed the tail, we want to rinse it under running water. What we want to do is, you can see this tail has a slight curl in it. If you put this under hot water, that's going to straighten these feathers out and that's going to get rid of the curl. So that's what we'll do for our final rinse and straighten out those feathers. So you can see that curl has been removed. Now we want to just wring to remove all the water, just using our hands to wring out all the water. Now this tail is ready to be dried. We want to get started on drying the tail. There is still a fair amount of water in the tail, so I'm going to use paper towels to just squeeze out the rest of that water, just to make the drying process go a little bit faster. Some of the tail feathers did come off during the fleshing and washing process. That's nothing to be concerned about. We'll just dry them separately and then reattach them when we display out the tail. We're going to use a hair dryer to dry this tail. And I'm just going to start working all over the feathers, flipping it around, making sure all the sides are getting dried. All right, now that the tail is completely dry, we've also dried all the other parts, all the other feathers that had come off during the washing process. Now we want to display the tail. So to do that, we want to take a piece of freezer paper, shiny side up. The reason why I want to use a piece of freezer paper with the shiny side up is when we use our super glue to glue these feathers in place, we don't want it to stick to the table. So we're going to start flaring out the tail. You can use your tweezers to start aligning the tail. Because this is a flying mount, we're going to have the tail displayed out pretty much as full as it can go. I think that side looks pretty good. We are going to tape this down just to hold it in place while we work on the other side. Now, if you remember, on the other side, some of the feathers came out during the fleshing and washing process, so we will be putting those back in place at this time. I'm going to slip these right back in place. You want to make sure that your feather quills are touching on these ones that you're putting back in, so that way the glue touches everything. Check for balance, make sure both sides are equal, and it looks like they are. We want to lock down these feathers here with a little bit of tape. Want to arrange these feathers here as well. Now we're going to use a combination of Zap-A-Gap or super glue and borax. That makes for almost a bone-tight, secure bond when you mix those two chemicals together. You do want to be careful though when you're putting the borax onto the Zap-A-Gap. It can make kind of a noxious fume, so make sure you do this in a well-ventilated area. So we put down a layer of super glue or Zap-A-Gap and put a light dusting of borax right over the top of it. This is going to make it dry almost instantly. So you want to make sure you have everything set. A little bit more on this one side. Now that that's set up, we want to carefully peel up this tape that was sticking to the bench and flip it over and repeat the process on the back side. Again, a nice even layer of super glue along all the feather quills. Light dusting of borax. Let this sit for about 10 seconds just to make sure everything's set up and dried. Meanwhile, while that's drying, we want to prepare an attachment wire that we'll be super gluing onto the tail. This is some leftover 16 gauge from the wings. We want to sharpen both ends of the wire, cut about this much of the wire off, probably about 4 inches. We want to turn this into a loop. Sharpen the other end. And then we want to super glue this right onto the feather quills. You want to remove some of this excess borax. You may have to swing back around the front and check. Sometimes super glue likes to leak on the front. Just put a little bit more borax on that. This one looks very good. You want to put this right in the center of the tail. Apply a small amount of super glue and lock it in place with a small amount of borax. Knock off the excess. You may have to repeat this a couple of times just to make sure that wire is securely fastened to the tail. Check the front, make sure no glue is leaked onto the show side, which it hasn't. And there we have the completed tail ready to go on the flying pheasant.